Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Trade Australia. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffelsz. Today's episode is all around supply chain opportunities and how you can make the most of your supply chain. We've got an amazing lineup of guests for you, kicking off with Travis Erridge, who's the CEO of Team Insight. Hi, Travis.
Hi, how are you?
Good, mate. Thanks so much for coming into the studio. It's actually good to see other people.
It is good to get out, yeah, absolutely.
Mate, tell us about Team Insight before we kick off with a few questions.
Yeah, sure. So Team Insight started back in 2010 and we started as a project management business, really off the back of the GFC, helping clients go through change in terms of industrial facilities, warehouses and distribution centres. And we've evolved significantly over those 10 years. We now have a supply chain consulting business, a property consulting business, and a project management business, which is really source to shelf for clients, and how from network all the way through to fulfilment of their product.
Well, I can see all those three business units are so synergetic. They are, as you say, it brings everything together really nicely.
Absolutely.
So, Travis, with everything going on with COVID and this e-commerce boom, that's really highlighted the strains and deficiencies and some strengths of supply chains. Mm-hmm. So how's that impacted with you guys?
Look, it was interesting at the start of the whole COVID pandemic. We probably saw a little bit of a fall away and extreme behaviours, consumer behaviour in terms of, the toilet paper saga of March, April. Yeah. We've probably seen that steady out a little bit. And for us, we're now seeing a real focus for clients on how they fulfill orders in a very changing consumer behaviour world. So for them, it's all about agility at the moment. How do they move product to the end consumer in multi-channel ways of selling? Obviously, in Victoria at the moment, stores are closed, but in Sydney and Brisbane, stores are open. Yeah. So multiple different ways that they need to fulfill those orders. So yeah, very much a changing landscape and fast moving.
Well, one of the things I want to ask you, Travis, is that there's a lot of experts such as yourself saying that what's happened with COVID has brought forward e-com probably 5, sometimes even 10 years with that take-up of not just consumers, but the companies who need to get on board and get e-com ready. So what do you see as the future of supply chain? How do you see, you're at the coalface.
Yeah, look, and I believe it's correct. We were seeing a shift and a rapid shift towards that e-commerce channel. What has happened with COVID is it's obviously accelerated or turbocharged that change. And yes, we might have gone 5 years further forward quickly. What it's meant is that we were doing a lot of work with clients on leaning out their supply chain, both inventory, floor space, everything to the lowest cost denominator that they could to still fulfill their orders. What we're now seeing is that's now becoming a bit of an inhibitor for clients that have to be able to flex, to move quickly, to fulfill orders in different ways. It's a significant changing landscape and probably, depending on the customer, grocery customers can probably go fairly hard and lean. They know what their product range is going to be. And then you've got apparel customers at the moment that are only selling online, but what's the future look like for them? So the big question mark is we've got a very high watermark at the moment. It's where that watermark will finish.
Yeah. I want to ask you about, there's a lot of talk, as you say, that the lean supply chain versus an agile supply chain. Yeah. Could you describe for the viewers about how you define an agile supply chain?
So an agile supply chain means that the supply chain has to fulfill multiple channels of sale. So a very lean supply chain has a very focused, whether that's a store fulfillment or a click and collect type scenario, they have a very clear channel of what they're fulfilling and they have clear data and information and can design to suit. When it comes to agile, it's moving demand across the year, and it's also different channels of the way people are consuming products. So we're seeing that the concept of the endless aisle, that you're going to be able to buy a product in every single possible way, and supply chains have to fulfill that order. And so for some customers, you've seen a fulfillment in stores, for example. So you buy a product online, it's fulfilled at stores. The volumes that we're seeing at the moment mean that that's not possible for a lot of clients at the moment. So they're now having to build micro fulfillment or dark stores to be able to fulfill. So there's no people allowed in them, but they're basically just fulfilling orders.
Yeah, and I actually think it's really exciting. There's so many stuff cool stuff with warehousing, automation, dark warehousing, and I really respect what you do with Team Insight, because what companies have to do now, before they're all, they've got data, forecasts, all this historical seasonal stuff. That's all turn to the proverbial, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's essentially a blank canvas. Companies have to start rethinking from scratch their whole supply chain, and I can see why the strength of what you guys offer with TM is so powerful, because it gives a really objective, professional, innovative way to look at this, relook at their supply chain.
Yeah, I think some of the business, so we do a lot of business case work for clients that then leads to an implementation. Some of the business cases, some of the ideas and thought process are so far out there compared to where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we started the business. It has moved really rapidly. One of the big challenges also that customers were facing was, you could get product from overseas 2 to 3 days to Australia. So if you're fulfilling an order for an online order in Australia, and there's many retailers out there at the moment that do sort of 5 day, 6 day, 7 day delivery, well, people will go and find it offshore or find it quicker, faster. The retail competitors are changing as well, which is one of the key things that a lot of retailers are thinking about.
That's again, I really love with supply chain what smart companies are doing, are using that as a value add to their customers.
Absolutely.
If you've got a strong supply chain, a real flexible supply chain, that can be make or break between the consumer making that decision.
Oh, absolutely, and it's a cost of, it used to be a cost of sales type scenario. Now it's a loss of sales. Yeah. It's about whether they're losing that offering. But one of the other things that's really important that's happening in our space is we're seeing this sort of drive towards people wanting the multi-channels of how they get it, and retailers are probably they've had websites, they've had issues associated with how they actually keep the customer engaged and keep them around. And we saw with the recent pandemic, people with waiting lists on their websites and so forth. So that's losing customers and to an alternative source.
Yeah, and customers are, as you say, they're used to now. They've almost been spoiled.
Yes.
That's the fact that when things are good, they can just expect it the next day delivery or whatever it is, especially in a market like Australia where we are. Economies of scale just doesn't cut it. You've got to be really clever about your supply chain.
You do, and high cost of labour. So one of the things that we're also seeing is in terms of the supply chain itself, we're being asked to design a supply chain for 10 to 15 years, and we're doing that. And typically a heavily automated facility is 3 years away from the time we start to the time it starts moving product. Then typically a 10-year lease. So you're sort of talking 13 years. You're trying to predict 13 years in advance in a fast-moving climate. One of the things that's really important is those consumers that will be buying that product at the moment are 15 to 18 years old. Yeah. So when you think about that, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to continue to shift towards that e-commerce channel. So it's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's fantastic insight. It's, I could talk about it all day. So I love this stuff. So thanks so much, Travis, for coming in and joining us.
No problem.
What's the best way for the viewers to check out TM Insight and get in touch with you and your team?
Yeah, so best to come onto our website, www.tminsight.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks so much, Travis. Mate, look forward to having you back on the show on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
As all this new landscape shifts and moves.
Thank you very much.
Great. Cheers. There you've heard from Travis Erridge, who's the CEO of TM Insight. Stick around after the break. We'll be joined as well by another industry expert talking about supply chain recruitment. So Tony will join us very soon. Cheers.
Do you know the real impacts of your products and supply chain? What about the living and working conditions of the people who make your goods? Companies must now comply with strict modern slavery laws across the globe. Consumers too are holding brands accountable for their social and environmental impacts. ATLC is the exclusive representative of the Ethical Trade Alliance in Australia and New Zealand. We can help you take control of your supply chain, modern slavery auditing, sustainable procurement accreditation, sustainable freight and logistics programs. Ensure your supply chain is not harming people or the planet. Protect your brand reputation and do the right thing. Contact us at ATLC today and start to reduce the negative impacts of your global supply chains.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Trade Australia. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffelsz. As I mentioned at the outset, this episode's all around supply chain optimization and how you can find the right people to help support the supply chain re-engineering and actually make sure you get the most out of your supply chain. Now we're joined by Tony Richter, who's the Managing Director of Bastian Consulting. Hi, Tony. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lawrence. Thanks for having us on.
Mate, what I'm going to ask you a little bit more about supply chain impact, but tell us about Bastian and how it came about to kick us off.
Sure. No, look, thanks for that. So I myself have been in supply chain executive search for about 10 years now. Either being based here in Sydney, or I did spend about 4 years in Singapore prior to returning from Singapore to Sydney to start this company. So Bastian's been around for about just over 3 years now. Look, we're a small boutique in terms of headcount. There's only 4 of us. We're very COVID friendly. We all work from home, which has been helpful for our business model. But we do work with large tier 1 organizations to help them source top talent, specifically in that supply chain logistics space.
Great. Well, look, as I mentioned, I think so much disruption has taken place, not just in Australia, but globally with supply chain because of COVID, and really exposes skills, deficiencies, but really, I think the key word is opportunities. And companies now, supply chain has often been out of sight, out of mind. So, you look at the end results and the CFO might look at sort of inventory costs and stuff. But now, if you've got a really strong supply chain or you've got agile supply chains, you can make a massive difference to your bottom line and to your customer experience. So I'm guessing that you guys are pretty, snowed under with companies saying, look, we need some supply chain experts who can help us.
Yeah, look, I think that's absolutely true. I think supply chain used to be seen as a cost center, as a back office function. And now it's really a differentiator in terms of getting that product faster to the customer, and not only faster, but in a way that the customer enjoys. I think we've seen examples where it's not just about delivery in a fast pace or on time, but it's around the experience the customer has too. So that need for an improved customer experience is really there. Yeah. I think for us right now, you're seeing a huge amount of emphasis being put on specific sectors. I mean, for us, we've been really busy in the e-commerce space, software and technology, and supply chain transformation. I think you had Travis on here earlier from TM Insight. That space around logistics transformation, so DC design, automation within the facilities, the network modeling, basically reconfiguring your entire network is hugely important right now. And that ties into, people talk about the digitization of supply chain and the change of retail models from bricks and mortar to e-commerce. That's been happening for a while now, even before COVID, but I think COVID's really kind of put the gas pedal to the floor and accelerated that at a huge rate. And so you see all these business models that don't actually work anymore, and the networks can't support the pre-existing business models. And so now, whether you're a new software vendor or a vendor that's been around for a while with some new omni-channel capability, or the consultancy and transformation businesses, there's a ton of activity around how do we redefine our network to meet the redefined customer demand. And there you see an exceptional amount of activity in that space that's really just trying to get the customer what they want now. And that ties into, people being interested to order products online now. So yeah, it's definitely a space that's evolving rapidly.
I really think that one of the things you just mentioned and touched on there, Tony, is that customer experience, and supply chain drives that customer experience in so many ways. So it is critical, because in the past, customers were quite forgiving. I think, especially with COVID, but the e-com and even now m-com with mobile commerce, they've got very high expectations. And if your supply chain can't deliver and meet those expectations, you will lose transactions, you'll lose customers.
Yeah, I think that ties. So we just finished doing a global head of customer experience role for an e-commerce furniture retailer out of Singapore. And the whole emphasis, it would traditionally used to be customer service, and now it's being moved into customer experience with a lot of continuous improvement, customer feedback. And if you think about buyers who go online and purchase product and then they put a review online, a negative online review is probably the worst thing a company can have. And so now you've got these dedicated teams to try to manage the customer cycle so delicately with such with gloves to make sure they don't mess it up, and so the experience the customer goes through is perfection. Now, of course, there's going to be mistakes, but they're really trying to fine tune the entire customer journey through their purchase and receiving of goods, so that there's really no reason for them to go online and write that negative review. And so that customer experience is a huge emphasis. I mean, it's not just e-commerce people or organizations, it's everyone now, but you see a lot of investment being put into that space right now.
Yeah. Tony, I want to ask you as well about the expanded roles and skill sets of supply chain now versus even 5 or 10 years ago. You know, when I started in supply chain going back probably 20 years or so, people who were supply chain managers pretty much came out of a warehouse and they had practical experience. Now you've got professional supply chain gurus who've got data analytics, business intelligence, business analytics. You've got a whole range of IT interfacing capability. There's so many diverse roles of a supply chain and diverse skill set. How do you go about trying to match those to the organization?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. I think, I often say to people, everyone's definition of supply chain is different depending on if you manufacture a product and what type of product you manufacture, or what type of service you provide, or you're a consultancy business. So the supply chain or people's definition can be very different. I think in terms of skills, the shift from what I've seen and what we're experiencing has gone from really understanding how to maximize processes and maximize efficiencies within systems, or running data sets, or being able to process information. Now it's really shifting towards interpreting information. I think that's a clear distinction. And I often talk about the data skills, and not to make it just about the information coming from technology, but there's two parts to this. So one is actually defining the problem accurately. So I think there's almost too much information and data available to supply chain professionals or leaders in business at any functional level. So in trying to define accurately and clearly what is actually the problem, what is the data telling us, that's a big skill set for us that we try to look for examples of, reducing the complexity of complex situations into a simple to define outcome. And then once you have the clarity of what the problem is, using that data into actionable insights. And that's the other piece now. So around, well, what does this mean? And then not only what does this mean, what do we do next based on what this means as well? And I think that's the big thing for us now. I think all of the analysis work and how to maximize manufacturing processes or distribution networks, this function's been around for 20, 30 years now. There's always room for improvements, but there's case studies on manufacturing efficiencies or S&OP or distribution network planning. There's enough content out there as to know what good looks like. Now it's really around, okay, we understand what good looks like, but we're still having problems, and this is what the data is telling us. How do we resolve this based on the data now? And I think that's really the big focus, rather than trying to understand, we need to embed a new software, we need to reinvent S&OP. Well, that people were talking about this 15, 20 years ago. I think that's outdated now.
Yeah. Do you know what I've really enjoyed about talking to you, Tony, is that, I speak to a lot of recruitment firms, and they're great at placing people, and they do the stuff, but what really stands out just by talking to you is your understanding of supply chain, which when you're trying to recruit candidates for supply chain roles, you can't get better than that. So it's a really great commendation to you. Congratulations. Yeah. So look, it's definitely, I think, what you're offering with Bastian is so important, because companies do need to make sure they've got the best people in their supply chain, the best roles, and really driving their business forward with the right candidates as well. So what's the best way for companies to get in touch with you? But also, I understand you're not just Australia focused, you're globally capable.
Yeah, look, you're right. We do work on roles across the region. I think in terms of, our differentiator, I typically talk about, so with myself, 10 years in the industry, I've got a master's degree in supply chain, and I used to work in procurement and operations. And that's not a brag or a humble brag. It's more just, I've got enough credibility to have functional conversations. So that's the starting point, right, in terms of understanding the space. I'm not an expert, but I can certainly engage in technical conversations with professionals. I do know that our industry has a little bit of a used car salesman reputation to it as well. So for us, it's really around simple customer service, focused around returning every phone call, answering every email. And then the final point I'll leave you with in terms of our service and how we differentiate ourselves, we're very focused on long-term partnerships. I often tell candidates, this isn't the right job I have for you. You know, I use the simple slang around, not every job I have is the right job for each candidate, and not every company hiring someone is the right company as well. And I know it sounds overly simple, but I think there's a huge stigma around this industry around just trying to put anyone into a job to get the fee. It's a very slow play on our end. I know that, and sometimes I'm sacrificing revenue for the right decision. But ultimately, that's kind of how we've been operating, and that's reflective of myself and us being in the business for so long as well.
Yeah, congratulations, Tony. Love the way you go about it, and looking forward to keeping in touch with you. And I'm sure as we re-emerge out of this COVID situation, not just in Australia but globally and regionally, companies are going to really start looking towards your organisation to try and get the best people who can help them get to the next level.
No, that's great. Thanks, Lawrence. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tony. Look forward to keeping in touch. So there you have it. You heard from Tony Richter from Bastian Consulting. Whatever you need in supply chain to check out the market and find out what you can do to grow your business, supply chain is a really great way of doing that. So stick around. After the break, we'll be joined by Paul Zalai from FTA and APSA. So we'll see you very soon.
So, you'd like to sell your products in Australia? Well, Australia is unlike any other global market on Earth. Proper research and preparation is the key for success. You should at least consider in-depth market research and competitor analysis, partner profiling and matching, and a robust distribution and order fulfillment strategy. Your supply chain is critical. Warehousing, freight and transport costs can make or break your success. ATLC can fast-track your Australian market entry success. We offer tailor-made programs to suit your business. Enter Australia the smarter way. Contact ATLC today.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Trade Australia. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffelsz. As I mentioned at the outset, today's show is all about supply chain, how you can optimise it, how you can find the right candidates. What's a really important part of supply chain, especially here in Australia, is making sure you've got the right infrastructure knowledge and expertise and partners around as well. So now we're joined by Paul Zalai, who's part of FTA and APSA. Hi, Paul. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Lawrence. How are you?
Great to see you, mate, always. Before, just for some of the viewers who don't know who you are, can you explain about FTA and APSA for all the global viewers, please, Paul?
Sure. Freight and Trade Alliance, FTA, is a peak industry body representing mainly the import sector, freight forwarders, and we've got several hundred freight forwarder members and a small number of very large importers. So we're really focused on advocacy, training, and information dissemination to the import sector.
Great work that you do, mate, and it's a really strong advocate voice to government and to the industry overall as well. So congratulations on that. Paul, I know that there's been a whole range of stuff now, but can I ask you to provide an overview of some of the recent impacts, operational impacts with the industrial action in Sydney and some of the stevedore charges? Can you talk us through some of the challenges there?
Yeah, well, I can, Lawrence. One of the things I was going to mention as well is the FTA also represents large exporters. So we run the Secretariat for the Australian Peak Shippers Association. So the impacts of Port Botany are affecting the whole supply chain, import and export. So we've got problems at the port there, lengthy delays, vessels waiting at port, a whole combination of reasons. We've had apparently, excuse the pun, but a perfect storm.
Yeah.
So we had adverse weather conditions. We had understand that there's been some systems enhancements at the stevedores, rail interface developments. But the big one seems to be the industrial action imposed by the MUA. Yeah. All of that has resulted in lengthy delays. Vessels that normally turned around within about 36, 48 hours are spending up to 5, 7, 10 days waiting to get serviced. And as a result of that, we've got a whole lot of different impacts. On the import side of things, We've got a situation where shipping lines haven't been able to evacuate empty containers, bearing in mind we have a lot more import than export trade. So that surplus of empty containers are now filling up the empty container parks. Transport operators are being forced to double, triple handle cargo, those empty containers with redirections set by the shipping lines, and now are holding boxes in their own yards until they've got somewhere to return cargo. So we've got all kinds of congestion there within the port precinct. But yeah, like I said, the flow-on effect is now for exporters as well. We've got a couple of different factors. We've got shipping lines that are now making the commercial decision to bypass Sydney altogether.
Oh no, yeah.
And so discharging Sydney cargo in either Brisbane or Melbourne, and now importers are having to have paid the cost to and wear the delays of moving freight back to Sydney. But probably more alarming is on the export side of things, where, you know, I spoke to one of the major cotton shippers earlier this morning. They said they were expecting 6 potential voyages over the coming weeks, which is now down to 2. And even those that are still servicing the port, we've got exorbitant infrastructure surcharges being administered by the shipping lines.
I was going to ask about that. I mean, as you said before, Paul, it couldn't have happened at a worse time. Everyone's trying to navigate through this whole COVID situation. You know, doing business in any way is really challenging. So to put these charges on top of all these other dramas that companies are trying to deal with, what's their justification for? Obviously, there's congestion, but you know there has to be some other way that they can work with you better and the shippers.
Look, it's been quite concerning actually. The Mediterranean Shipping Company were the first to introduce this surcharge. I think it was last Thursday. We very much expected that other shipping lines would follow. We didn't expect it would be so quickly. CMA, CGM, A&L, the next day they implemented a surcharge. The MSC surcharge is $300 US per TEU. The CMA, CGM, 285 US dollars. And today we heard that Pacific Asia Express are also implementing a surcharge of $300 US. You know, again, obviously shipping lines are in a free and open market can charge whatever they like. It's up to entities to negotiate. But the concerning thing here, there's been no consultation, no engagement, and the fees have been imposed with only a few days' notice. Meaning on the import side of things, those that have got, you know, had projected their landed costs, that'll be blown out altogether. And same with exporters. And on the export side of things in particular, where you're looking at a lot of high volume and low value goods, it's, you know, that $300 US per 24 container or 600 per 40 foot, you know, translates to an extra, you know, $5 per bale for cotton, an extra $17 per tonne for grain. And those same sectors who have been suffering from the drought finally get a bumper year. It actually rains. They get crop, they've got a market to service, and now they'll be doing it at a loss. And then similarly again on imports, it's going to affect all importers. But again, you know, you've got to have some sympathy for those entities that have got high volume, low value product, you know, the steel importers and others. It just translates to massive costs.
Yeah, and just as you say, I think companies understand that every sector, whether it's the carrier or so forth, have their own challenges, but you need to give companies time, importers, exporters, time to adjust, time to consult with them, as you say, so they can rejig their pricing or talk with their customers about absorbing some of those additional fees. So it is disappointing that there's no consultation and that lead time to actually engage with you and your shippers is really poor.
Yeah, look, Lawrence, I think the thing that we're still struggling to understand, and we're trying to engage with the shipping lines to get a better understanding. But if the stevedores are unable to service the shipping line for whatever reason, whether it's the industrial relations issues or whatever, we would have thought that the shipping lines would have a contractual arrangement with the stevedore if they can't meet the KPIs that they would be compensated. Not sure if that actually exists, and we're trying to find out more detail on that. But in the meantime, the shipping lines have found their own way of getting compensation by imposing this unregulated charge.
And what do you see long term, Paul? How do you think, I mean, this whole situation, I know it bubbled away even before COVID and there was some increases going on, but now this is just exacerbated with everything else going on. What do you see long term? How do you think this will be resolved or maybe not?
Look, it's an interesting question, Lawrence. We had our views and our advocacy, but we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and review all of that on the basis of what we've seen now. Our concerns previously were on the infrastructure surcharges or the terminal access charges administered by stevedores, which have rapidly grown from being like a few dollars for a booking fee to now up to, at the upper end, up to about $130 per container for import-export. Similarly, you've got empty container parks now. Again, they used to have a few dollar booking fee. Now it's up around, some of the fees at $20, $30, $50, $60, but they're moving so quickly that they might quickly overtake the stevedores. They've really got the hang of charging. So put on top of that, administration fees for transport operators who have to outlay this and have got cash flow implications. We extrapolated out and put a submission to the Deputy Prime Minister for intervention on all of this. It's costing the importers and exporters of Australia $1 billion a year in these charges. Now, we had been advocating that the stevedores, if they have to recover their costs, whether it's rent, whether it's labour, whether it's electricity, power, whatever, they should be either absorbing that cost or passing it on to their commercial client, the shipping line. We were of a view that the shipping lines would be then in a position to, importers, exporters, forwarders would be able to negotiate with the lines on the appropriate rate. But what we've seen now over the last few days has forced us to rethink things, because we've seen that the shipping lines equally have no problem implementing a surcharge without notice. And even if we were successful in our original advocacy, maybe all we would have achieved is transferred it, rather than the stevedores imposing such an exorbitant fee, that shipping lines could do it. And we're not suggesting that there's any collaboration between the parties or any anti-competitive behaviour, but certainly a case where there's follow the leader. Once one stevedore, or once one shipping line, or once one empty container park takes the lead on one of these fees, rather than using it as an opportunity to differentiate your commercial services, we're finding that these different parties are actually following each other and take it in turns to ratchet up the costs. So I think, to be honest, I think our only course here is for some serious government review and regulation.
I was going to ask about that, Paul. What's the government's role, and how can we, as an industry and you guys as bodies, to try and encourage them to get more involved and help importers and exporters? Because the last thing any of us want to see in Australia is to reduce trade. We need to increase trade. We need to support exporters, importers. We need to make sure that it is easier to do business and more affordable, so that we can compete on a global scale.
Look, we do need the shipping lines to keep servicing the country, especially at the moment when air freight's just been decimated with no passenger movements, and so we've become even more reliant on sea cargo. I think we need oversight, though. The problem is the number of shipping lines servicing Australia over the years has reduced. We've got larger vessels coming to the country, which is great. That should bring economies of scale. But what it's forced is more consortia or shared vessel arrangements with shipping lines. And we've got the Part 10 of the Competition and Consumer Act that we administer, actually, in partnership with the Registrar for Shipping, to monitor those. But having performed that role for the last few years, we can see that legislation doesn't cut it. We responded to the ACCC earlier this year to their discussion paper, where they were proposing the introduction of a class exemption regime and to wind back the Part 10 arrangements. We very much support that approach. We think the ACCC is the entity that needs to keep a close eye on this. And if we are going to allow exemptions from standard competition law, it needs a regulator with a lot of muscle to oversee it. And even furthermore, we might be putting in supplementary submissions now, because we can see with these surcharges that have come in without notice, maybe we need to follow the path of the US with the Federal Maritime Commission, where they're mandating 30 days notice to allow industry to adapt.
Yeah, look, that makes sense. I think that this is going to be an ever-changing space, Paul, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I'd love to stay in touch, get you back on the show, so you can keep us updated and the viewers updated with all the changes. And congratulations on the work you're doing with both FTA and APSA, because it is a really vital role. So thanks, mate, for sharing your insight and your time with us and the viewers, and let's talk again very soon.
Okay, thanks again, Lawrence.
Thanks, Paul. Take care. Cheers. So there you heard from Paul Zalai from FTA and APSA. As you can hear, there's a whole range of challenges that are taking place, and supply chain is so critical, as you've heard with the other guests on today's show, to making sure that it grows the economy. And the infrastructure behind all that is where the Peak Shippers Association and other organisations, FTA, can really help with the industry sector to try and keep it competitive and cost effective and make sure that the end consumers get those results and the economy keeps growing. So thanks for joining us on today's show. Stay tuned again next week. I look forward to keeping you all up to date with all the trade, logistics and supply chain opportunities across Australia. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffelsz. Take care and we'll see you again next week. Cheers.